get started. So my name is Anna. I'm an instructional designer here at Sumo Logic, and I live in California. And I'm going to be leading today's virtual session on rule tuning and customization. So I have a Sumo helper with me, Paul. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Paul Bowen. I'm a technical channel manager at Sumo on the security side. So I'll be here to help out Anna and answer questions in chat.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, just let Paul know and he'll answer you in chat. So quick poll just to get started. Have you used CSE before today? Give everyone a few minutes to answer the poll. Just want to gauge kind of where everyone's at. All right. Looks like about 50-50. Half of you have used CSE already, half of you have used Sumo but not CSE, and no one's completely new to Sumo, so that's great. So being familiar with Sumo is going to help, definitely not required. Being familiar with CSE, we're just going to introduce everyone to CSE today. So just a quick review for those of you new to CSE. CSE is Sumo's Cloud SIEM Enterprise Security Information Management System. Most modern SOCs or security operations centers have a SIEM, and CSE SIEM does a lot of the correlation work to help you find the most relevant events. Let's check chat. All right. So a quick little review of the CSE data pipeline. First, Sumo collects all of your data, and those of you who are familiar with Sumo are probably familiar with this part of the pipeline, and those become your log messages. But that's pretty much where Sumo Logic stops and where CSE begins. So then when you forward your messages into CSE, they're parsed, mapped, and enriched into records, and these records are then compared to rules. And if there's a match between what the rule is looking for and what the record contains, then an entity is extracted, a signal is created, and these signals are security use cases. Each record is compared to all the rules in CSE. So if there's a potential security event, then that entity is extracted, a severity score is assigned to it, and that signal is created. Some signals could be false alarms, so there are legitimate reasons why a user might be logged into two different devices, for example. But when several signals with the same entity correlate or cluster together, that's when you get your insights. We have this correlation engine down here and our insights, and that's where you get your actionable security investigations. All right, everyone still with me? Just remember you can use chat at any time if you have any questions. So let's move on and zoom into this part of the pipeline. This records, signals, rules section is kind of where we're going to be focusing our workshop today. So we're going to tune and customize some rules and insights so that the analysts we work with get the most relevant notifications and can focus their attention on the most significant security alerts. So the simplest customization is a rule tuning expression. And these are usually exceptions to a rule, and they're appended to a rule with an AND logic. When you write a rule, you also configure its severity score. Severity scores are on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being the most severe. And if the information in a record matches a rule, then the entity is extracted from that record. So the entity might be something like an IP address or a username or a domain name. It tells you who the potential threat is. And the severity score is then associated with that entity. So once an entity is in CSE's system, then CSE tracks the total severity score of all the signals associated with each entity as an activity score. By default, that activity score needs to be 12 or higher before an insight is created. So if you want an insight to be created with the default settings, you need to have 2 or 3 rules with a severity score of 5 or 6 to trigger, a couple times, or you need to have one rule with a severity score of 1 triggered 12 different times. Any combination will work. All right, so hopefully that all makes a little bit of sense. And we're just going to jump straight into the workshop. So we're going to access the training environment, and I'm going to send everyone a PDF in the chat. Hopefully you can download this PDF from the chat. Let me get in there. Okay. Have a little bit of trouble here. Paul, do you have the PDF handy? Can you upload it? There we go. I got it. Okay, yeah, Paul also has it. So you can download that PDF and you can follow along with us. I also have a version of the PDF right here. So we're on step 1 right now. We are logging into the CSE environment. So you're going to go to service.sumologic.com, use the username training plus sock at sumologic.com, and use the password sumologic. The O in logic is a 0 and an exclamation point after. Again, all those instructions are in the PDF, and also Paul has pasted them in. I'm going to log in right now. I already have my username, training sock at sumologic.com, and make sure I have sumo logic with an exclamation point typed in as the password. So when you get here, this is the normal homepage. You should be familiar with this. Missing the PDF still. So some people have security settings, depending on your workplace or your Zoom settings, that will prevent file downloads. So you can either sit back and watch, or Paul will be pasting the information in chat as well. Sorry about that, Kevin. Web version, yes, there we go. Yeah, so not every version of Zoom allows file downloads. So this is the normal Sumo that most of you are familiar with. While we're here, I just want to remind everyone that if you click certification and click get certified, it will pop up with a new tab. And this tab has all of our self-paced training. There's some security and Cloud SIEM courses in here. There's exams. A lot of it's very similar to what you get in our cert jams. And some of it is also just bonus material. So back to Sumo Logic. Once you're logged into Sumo Logic, if you go down here into the left black bar, and if this black bar has disappeared for you, you can just click this Sumo Logic up here and it'll reappear. You go down to this left black bar, it says Cloud SIEM Enterprise at the bottom left. Click that and you will get a new tab window. Now, in the upper right corner of this tab, you should see a little randomly generated symbol. And if you click it, you'll see a profile that says Training SOC Training Analyst. If you see your own profile picture, or if you see something that's not this, then you may have SSO'd into your own account. And you want to be in this training account because we don't want to mess with anything in your home systems. We want to be in this nice, safe dev environment. You also might notice that the URL here is jask.ai. That's because CSE was formerly run by a company called Jask, which was acquired by Sumo Logic in 2019. So that's why you see this URL in some of the workshops today. So once you're logged in, we can explore the homepage a little bit. So in the middle, we see the Insight radar. And on the right, you'll see an activity feed of the most recent insight statuses and the most recent insights that are created. If any new rules have been added, they'd be in this little activity feed too. And on the left, you see a little summary. So here we have, in the last 24 hours, 2 million records ingested, 261 signals created out of those records, and 8 insights created out of those signals. So let's go right ahead and customize some of those rules and insights. First, let's check out the rules that are already in our environment. So if you go to the top nav where it says content, and you click that little drop down and you'll see rules. If you click that, so content and then rules, you'll see all the rules that are already in our system. So we have 603 rules in our system already. I'm going to click this first one just to show you what a rule looks like under the hood. You can choose any rule you like, or you can just sit back and watch me. We're not doing anything quite yet. So on the left, you see the rules logic. So this is just Boolean logic, typically, if it's a match rule, and it'll just say what the rule is looking for. So here we've got some, we're looking for a URL that has this little regular expression here. We're looking for an array that contains something in some of these lists. And if any of these matches are made, if this is true, then a signal is created. And that signal uses these entities, it uses this name, it has this description. So this tells you a little bit about what this rule is looking for. This isn't a very severe rule, it has a severity of 1, and it uses these tactics and techniques. And these tactics and techniques are straight from the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So that's a little bit about how rules work. Let's get on to rule tuning expressions. So a rule tuning expression is applied as an AND statement, and you add it to an existing rule. It's usually simple logic that you add to rules. With rule tuning, you can modify existing rules without rewriting them from scratch. So this lets you customize them without a lot of work. Use them when you have a small number of specific exceptions to existing rules. Version 9 of ATT&CK, I'm not sure. I think Paul can answer that. So rule tuning expressions. Once you've written a rule tuning expression, you can apply that tuning expression to multiple rules, and you can also apply multiple tuning expressions to each rule. So it goes both ways. They're very flexible. We're going to learn how to apply one tuning expression to multiple rules, and then we'll also learn how to apply multiple tuning expressions to one rule. And then finally, when you use rule tuning, your expressions or your tuning expressions are retained even if Sumo updates that rule. So Sumo logic is constantly pushing updates, and you'll get to use all of those updates to your advantage. All right, everyone still with me? I hope so, because it is time for a pop quiz. Don't worry, you're not graded. These quizzes are anonymous, so I don't know who answers what. I just want to check in and see how everyone's doing, if everyone's following along. So the question is, when would you use a rule tuning expression? You have a new data source and you want your rules to detect it. You have an exception to an existing rule. You want to add a higher severity score to an existing rule, or you want to ignore CSEs out of the box rules. I'll go ahead and give people a few minutes to answer. And it looks like about half of you have answered the poll. Let's see if we can get a few more answers in. All right, 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So it looks like most of you got it right. You have an exception to an existing rule. That is correct. That is the most probable use case for a rule tuning expression. If you have a new data source for your rules, you would typically do a new log mapping or a new rule entirely, depending on your situation. If you want to add a higher severity score to an existing rule, you can edit that rule directly. And if you want to ignore CSEs out of the box rules, that would probably require creating new rules. But good, most of you got it right, so that's good. So let's go back to our student guide. So we're going to go to step 2, write a rule tuning expression. So you can follow along in the PDF. You can watch me. I will demonstrate first and show you, and then I will give everyone a few minutes on their own. So don't worry about having to try to keep up with me if I go a little fast, and I apologize if I do go a little fast. So let's return to that rule that we were examining. So right here, you see add tuning expression as an option. But if I click choose, there's no options available. That means that we have to create a new rule tuning expression. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to content and then rule tuning. And there's nothing to see here because there are no rule tuning expressions in this environment yet, but we're all going to make one. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to hit create. And once again, all these instructions are in your guide. So you hit create and then you name your rule. I'm going to use my initials, OAN, rule tuning. And I am going to go down here and I'm going to select the rules that I want to add. So we can say we can add this to all your rules, or you can do the selected rules. We're going to do selected rules today. And I want to add this to some firewall related rules. So I'm going to type firewall into the search bar. And there's a firewall related rule about the AWS firewall. I'm going to type firewall again. And here's a checkpoint firewall. So just find as many rules as you want to add. And then you write your logic. So remember, this is an and statement. And they're usually exceptions. So if I want to allow myself past these firewalls, but I don't want to allow anyone else past these firewalls, then I'm going to say something like user email. If I type user, I start seeing like, oh, user ID, user role, user email. So I'm going to choose email from this pop-up, and I'll use exclamation point equals for does not equal. And then I'm going to use quotes, single quotes, and then training soc@sumologic.com. So this will allow me, training soc@sumologic.com, past all these firewalls, but it won't allow other people. You can use double quotes here, but you won't get the nice syntax highlighting. The best practice is to use single quotes here. And you can use any logic that you like for these. This is just an example. When you are done writing your rules, writing the logic and checking for which rules you want to add, you're going to look down here next to the submit button, and I'm going to draw a little triangle with an exclamation point. You might see a little yellow triangle with an exclamation point right here where I drew one. If you don't, that means there's no errors. If you do see that triangle, then there's some kind of error that you need to resolve. But I don't have any triangles, so that means that I'm good to go. So I'm going to click submit. And when I click submit, I get a really small pop-up at the bottom that says the rule tuning expression has been created successfully. And now if I go back to content and then rule tuning, and I hit refresh, there's my rule tuning expression, and some of you are with me and ahead of me, and here are AYs and KB and DMR's rule tuning expression as well. So great, looks like a lot of you are on top of it with me or ahead of me. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to finish their rule tuning expression. And remember, you can reach out and chat if you have any questions. And when you get a chance, please answer this poll. And yes, our rules are updated every 2 weeks, sometimes more often if there's an incident. And anytime that MITRE updates the tactics and techniques, we update them as well. Great question, Kevin. And great answer, Paul. All right, Andrew asks, what happens when you sunset a rule? Paul, do you want to take it away? When you sunset a rule, it's removed from the interface. There you go. All right, according to the poll, it looks like everyone is either ready to move on or they're just sitting back and watching. They will try this exercise later when they get home. So that's great. So let's move on. You guys are eager to get to the meat. So everyone's just about done. So just a reminder, rule tuning expressions are one of the easiest ways and the most common ways to customize your rules, but sometimes you need to write a new rule from scratch. So you might do this if your system has a source that isn't covered by the default rules, or you're looking for a threat that isn't covered by the default rules, something like that. So if you go to content and then rules, you'll see the four, well, and then we hit create. You'll see the four different kinds of rules we have. Match, threshold, chain, and aggregation. So once again, that's content and then rules and then create to come up to this screen. So match rules are the simplest type. They take a simple Boolean statement, check if it's true or false. And if it's true, then the entity is extracted and the signal is created. Threshold rules are triggered when a match is found a certain number of times. So for example, if one failed login, it's totally acceptable, that's fine, people forget their passwords. But 5 failed logins, that's not acceptable, then maybe a threshold rule is what you want. You want to fire after the 5th failed login attempt. Chain rules fire when certain events happen in a certain time window. So for example, if you want to look for 5 failed login attempts followed by 1 successful login attempt that all happen within 1 hour, you could use a chain rule. And then aggregation rules are triggered when up to 6 different events accumulate over time. So for example, if you want a rule that looks for a large number of different types of event types from a single device IP, then you could use an aggregation rule. But in our exercise today, we're going to just do a custom match rule. Again, you can try to follow along. We are on step 3 in the guide now. Or you can just sit back and watch, and I'll give everyone a few minutes. So if you're not already here, content and then rules, and then go create, and then choose match as your rule type. I'm going to use my initials, OAN, and match rule for the rule type. And then here in the rule logic, I'm going to use some Boolean logic. So again, I can do any kind of start typing something up, and I'll see a bunch of different drop downs. If I type OS, then I see device OS name, and I'm going to say that equals Windows because for some reason, I just think Windows users are super suspicious today. You could do anything here, region, domain name, IP address, any field you like. Get creative if you like. And use the rule creator's autocomplete and syntax highlighting to your advantage. And if you ever need help finding the syntax, this little question mark right here, if you click it, it'll pop up with the docs. And so you can see all the different entities and attributes you can choose in the docs. So here I will now configure my signal. So I have my logic, very simple logic, just if it's a Windows user. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to go for a device IP as the entity. I'm going to use my test signal as the signal, and then looking for Windows users as the summary. And I'm going to give it a constant severity, but pretty low. Let's only give it a severity of 2. And then down here, I choose my tactics and techniques. So maybe this has something to do with defense evasion, and technique is account discovery. I know this isn't a very realistic example, but I'm just showing you all the different pop-ups you can have. So if you look here, I've got that little yellow triangle I was talking about earlier. A description is required. So I'm going to fill this in with test description, And now my yellow triangle error goes away. I'm going to save this rule as a prototype, and I want you to save your rules as a prototype too. This is a best practice whenever you create a new rule. You want to monitor the rule's behavior and make sure it's not creating too many false positives or doing anything funky to your insight creation before you let it loose in the wild. It's kind of like pushing something to a dev environment before pushing it to prod. So once everything's filled out, and once you check for your little yellow triangle and make sure your little yellow triangle is not there, then you can click submit. And once again, you'll get this little, the rule has created successfully dialog box. So once again, we are on step 3, write a custom rule. You can get creative with your rules. And if I go to content and then rules, and I sort by date created, descending, I should see I've got my rule, and looks like a bunch of you already have your rules in here as well. Great job. So we've made a custom rule tuning expression, we've made a custom rule, and now we're going to look at custom insights. So once you've created a rule, CSE will use it to create signals. And remember, it typically takes a few signals clustered together to generate an insight. But what if you want to be alerted right away when your new rule that you just wrote is triggered? That's where custom insights come in. So custom insights are based on one specific rule or a chain of rules. It's great for faster alerting for specific known threats. And you don't have to change your existing rules or insights. They still work just fine. So time for another quiz. Make sure everyone's still awake. Pop quiz, don't worry, you're not graded. It's anonymous. I can't tell who answers what. I just want to check in and see how everyone's doing. So when would you use a custom insight? When you wrote a custom rule, when you added a rule to an expression, when you want to create an insight when certain rules are triggered, or when you want to avoid false positives. So I know I went over this pretty quickly. Answers were all over the place. So the correct answer is that you want an insight. You always want to create an insight when certain rules are triggered. If you wrote a custom rule, that will just work like normal insights. You don't need a custom insight if you have a custom rule. And if you added a rule tuning expression that changed its severity, that also doesn't need custom insights. That will still work normally. And if you want to avoid false positives, so you suppress CSEs out of the box rules. In general, there's not a lot of false positives with CSEs out of the box rules. So that's typically not a concern. So the primary use case for a custom insight is you always want to create an insight when certain rules are triggered. So let's go make a custom insight. All right, so once again, we're going to go back to the CSE interface. And if you got logged off or something, just log back in. We are on step 4 of the PDF. So I'm going to go to content and then custom insights. And we don't have any custom insights here, but we're going to create one. So I'm going to click create. And I'm going to name this insight, and I'm going to name it with my initials, insight. And on the left, I'm going to choose the rules that, or the signals or rules that I need for this custom insight. So I'm going to look for my own initials, and I will see the match rule that I created just a few minutes ago. If you're following along, you can find your own rule that you created, or if you didn't get a chance to finish that exercise, you can use my rule. We only have one rule, so any order is fine. Although if you have multiple rules and you want to happen in a certain order, then you can use exact order. And then I will give it a name and a description. and a severity. I can also tag it with tactics and techniques. All the tactics and techniques that you could ever want are all in here. You can just scroll down and pick your favorites. And then once again, I look for any yellow triangles. There's no errors. If I ever get lost, I can typically hover and get the little, where are they? The little icons for the docs that take you to the docs, which is help.sumologic.com if you ever need. And once there's no errors, once everything's filled out the way I want, I click submit. I get the little pop-up that says insight has been created successfully. And then I can go back to content and then custom insights. And I see my custom insight and everyone else who's following along. So seems like a lot of people are following along right with me. I just want to check in and see if anyone needs more time or if they're done. Paul, that's a great example. So if you want to get a custom insight where every time a phishing link is clicked by someone in your C-suite, then you could use some of the pre-built rules that use Proofpoint and that detect phishing links and trigger them specifically for the email addresses that are in your C-suite. And then you would immediately get that insight alert, depending on how you have your alerting set up as well. All right, most people voted in the poll, and it looks like most people are just sitting back, watching, hanging out, and they'll try this exercise later. That's cool. So most everyone else who is doing it, and it's already been following along pretty tightly. So let's wrap it up. Let you go get back to happy hour. So hopefully everyone had a time to write their rule tuning expression and their custom match rule and their custom insight. It's pretty quick and easy. We got through it all in less than an hour, and we really hope that you enjoyed this workshop. So remember, CSE's out-of-the-box rules and insights are great. They'll cover most of your use cases, but we want you to have the flexibility to customize your environment however you want. And we learned 3 ways to do that. First, rule tuning expressions are a simple way to add small exceptions and other clauses to existing rules. Second, custom rules let you write logic that is unique to your system, covers threats or data sources that aren't covered by the built-in rules. And finally, custom insights let you get alerts based on just one rule or a chain of rules. If you're still curious about CSE, there's a lot of great resources. I have them linked at the bottom of the PDF. Sumo Logic's YouTube channel has recordings of webinars like this one, as well as micro lessons. The micro lessons will teach you the different parts of CSE and Sumo in bite-sized chunks, often in only 2 or 3 minutes. They're great quick references if you don't like reading docs. And if you have a little bit more than 5 minutes, you can check out our certification classes. Our live instructor-led Cert Jam classes include 2 hours of labs and instruction, followed by a 1-hour exam. Or you can take most of those same courses online, self-paced, through learn.sumologic.com. Plus, we have additional classes available in our self-paced library. And that concludes our session today.